All right, let's jump right in. Today we're going deep with the International Gemmological Institute, IGI, and their upcoming IPO.
IGI's really built a business on trust, haven't they? They're so key for ensuring the authenticity and the value of these precious stones that are traded, all over the world.
They're like, what, the guardians of sparkle?
Yeah.
I mean, instead of just taking a jeweler's word for it, you've got this independent scientific verification of what you're actually buying.
Yeah.
And they don't just do diamonds either, right?
Nope, not at all.
IGI looks at lab-grown diamonds, colored stones, even finished jewelry pieces.
Right, their scope is really broad, and that's actually one of the things that makes their business model so interesting. They've positioned themselves as that one-stop shop for all your gem certification needs, offering that full suite of
So
services.
let's break down that business model a little bit more. Their core is gem certification, right?
Mhm.
From what I've read, they use some pretty advanced techniques and equipment to analyze a stone's characteristics, like its carat weight, cut, color, clarity, even where it came from originally.
Incredibly sophisticated labs they've got. They're using everything from microscopes to lasers to make sure that the gemstone's authentic, figure out its quality. And the reports or certifications that they issue, those are like a passport for the stone. It really impacts its value, how it's traded in the global market.
So if I'm getting this right, like if you're buying a really significant diamond, let's say, you wouldn't just rely on the jeweler's word. You'd want that IGI certification to give you that unbiased assessment of its actual worth.
Exactly. It brings a level of transparency and trust that, frankly, you haven't always seen in this market. Historically, it's been a lot of, secrecy and subjective valuations. But IGI certification process, that removes the ambiguity, provides that standardized benchmark that buyers and sellers can depend on.
Yeah, it makes sense. Now let's talk about their global presence. They've got a pretty impressive network, don't they? I was reading about all these labs and gemology schools they have across, what, several continents?
Their global reach is one of their biggest strengths, for sure. Over 30 labs strategically located in those key gem trading hubs worldwide. So they can serve a really diverse clientele and tap into all sorts of different markets.
It's not just about having a well-known name then, is it? It's about, like, actually being where the gems are being traded.
Right.
That kind of accessibility's got to be huge for them.
It definitely helps them build those relationships with the major players in the industry, solidify their reputation as a reliable and accessible source. And don't forget about the gemology schools either.
Oh, right, right.
They're training the next generation of gemologists, which, even further strengthens their influence and their reach within the whole gem trade.
Smart. It's like a whole ecosystem they've built strategically around this whole gem trade. Okay, let's shift gears a little. Talk numbers. What's the financial picture looking like for IGI?
Pretty impressive from the reports you shared. Really substantial revenue growth these last few years.
Yeah, I saw that. Over 75% growth in just 2 years. That's not sparkle. That's like a supernova. What's driving that kind of growth?
Several factors, really. First, that global demand for gems, especially diamonds, that's been on the rise. As disposable incomes go up, particularly in those emerging markets, well, so does the desire for luxury items like gemstones.
So they're riding that wave of increased demand, but I mean, I'd imagine it's not just about being in the right place at the right time, right? They must be doing something right internally as well.
Oh, for sure. IGI's been making some very strategic decisions, invested heavily in technology to make their operations smoother, improve efficiency. For example, they have the software, SwiftCert, that allows for way faster grading and report generation.
In an industry where time is literally money, that sounds like a big deal.
It is. Also worth noting, they've been very good at managing their cash flow. High profit margin, hovering around 50%, which points to, strong pricing power and efficient operations.
Healthy margin. It suggests they're not just growing, they're growing profitably, which makes this IPO even more intriguing. But before we dive into that, I want to get a sense of the competitive landscape. Who else is playing in this gem certification arena?
IGI is a major player, no doubt, but there are other, established institutions out there. The biggest competitor's got to be the Gemmological Institute of America, GIA. They've been around for ages, have a very solid reputation.
GIA, yeah, I've heard of them. Aren't they the ones who came up with the 4 C's of diamond grading? Cut, color, clarity, and carat.
That's them, considered the gold standard for diamond grading. But, IGI has been making inroads, challenging that dominance, especially in certain markets.
So it's a bit of a gem grading duel. What are some of the key differences between these two titans?
One key difference is that global footprint. GIA, they have a strong presence in the US and Europe, but IGI, they've got a broader reach, particularly in Asia, which is a major, major growth market.
So IGI is strategically positioned in some of those fastest growing markets.
Mhm.
That's smart. What about their brand reputation, though? How does that compare?
They've built a very strong reputation for accuracy, consistency, and reliability in their grading. They were also early adopters of technology, which has helped them stand out.
Okay, so they're technologically advanced, globally present. Sounds like they're giving GIA a real run for their money.
Yeah.
But reputation's fragile, isn't it?
Hmm.
How do they maintain that trust and avoid any scandals that could damage their brand?
That's the thing. Their entire business model is built on trust. They have
Yeah.
to be so strict with quality control, make absolutely sure that their grading processes are impartial and transparent.
It's not just about the science, then, is it?
Right.
It's about the ethics too. They've got to be squeaky clean to keep that confidence in their certification strong. Okay, let's talk about well, the elephant in the room. This upcoming IPO. What's all the buzz about?
It's definitely generating a lot of interest. IGI is aiming to raise, well, substantial amount of capital, over 42 billion rupees, to be exact.
Whoa, that's a lot of sparkle. What are they planning on doing with all that cash?
A big chunk of it's earmarked for acquisitions. They're looking to buy out those international subsidiaries in Belgium and the Netherlands, further solidify their global network.
It's like they're building a gem-studded empire piece by piece.
Right. They're also setting aside funds for tech upgrades and to expand into new regions, particularly interested in those emerging markets with high growth potential.
So it's a growth story,
Yeah.
fueled by strategic acquisitions and expansion.
Ah,
But before anyone rushes out to buy into this IPO, we need to talk risks, right? Every gem's got its flaws.
of course, of course. No investment is without risk. In IGI's case, one of the biggest ones is that inherent cyclicality of the gem market.
Right.
It's really tied to global economic conditions.
Meaning that if the economy takes a downturn, demand for luxury goods, like gems, that could suffer and ultimately impact IGI's revenue.
Exactly. Another risk is competition.
Right.
The gem certification market's getting more and more competitive, new players popping up, existing ones innovating to grab market share. It's a constant battle to stay ahead of the curve.
What about regulatory changes? Could those pose a threat?
Definitely. Regulatory changes, especially things related to import-export restrictions or ethical sourcing requirements, those could impact their operations and ultimately their profitability.
It's like navigating a regulatory landscape that's always in motion. They have to be nimble, adaptable,
Yeah.
to stay ahead. So we've got these external factors like the global economy and regulations that could affect their performance. But what about the internal factors? What about the people at the helm?
That's another critical thing to look at. Investors need to assess the expertise and experience of that leadership team. Do they really understand the gem market? Do they have a clear vision for the company's future?
And it's not just the CEO, right? What about the board of directors, the
Yeah.
the overall governance structure?
Right, right. Good corporate governance is essential for any company, but especially one going public.
Mm-hmm.
Investors need to feel confident that IGI has strong internal controls, ethical practices.
It's about looking past the sparkle and assessing the company's foundation, isn't it? Do they have the right people and the right principles to handle the challenges ahead?
Exactly. You need to balance the allure of a potentially lucrative investment with a realistic view of the risks and the people in charge.
But we've covered a lot of
We
ground.
have.
Explored IGI's business model, those impressive financials, the competitive landscape, even the potential risks they face.
Their global reach that focus on technology and, just how vital it is to keep a pristine reputation in an industry built on trust. We touched on all that.
But this is just the tip of the iceberg.
Mm,
We got a lot more to uncover about IGI,
a lot more.
including their growth strategy and that fascinating world of lab-grown diamonds, which they're heavily invested in.
Before the break, we were talking about IGI's competitive landscape and that global presence they have. I want to touch on something we mentioned briefly earlier, their early adoption of technology.
Yeah, you mentioned that Swift search software for faster grading. Seems like a pretty smart move in a fast-paced industry like that.
It is, and it goes beyond just SwiftCert. They've been investing in other technologies as well, advanced imaging, data analytics, all to improve the accuracy and the efficiency of their processes.
So it's not just about being in the right markets, it's about using technology to stay competitive.
Right.
I'm curious, what are some of the specific ways that these tech advancements, how do they benefit IGI?
Well, for one, it lets them handle a much larger volume of gemstones, without having to sacrifice accuracy.
Right.
And that's essential in a market where demand is constantly on the rise.
That makes sense. If you can process more gems more quickly and accurately, you can serve more clients, bring in more revenue. Are there any other benefits?
Definitely. These tech investments also make it easier for them to spot those synthetic or treated gemstones. And that's becoming even more important as the technology for creating those synthetics gets more and more advanced.
It's like a high-tech game of cat and mouse. As those methods for creating synthetic gems get better, the ways to detect them need to keep up.
Exactly. And IGI's dedication to staying on the cutting edge of those tech advancements, that's a key thing that sets them apart in the market. It just reinforces their reputation as that reliable, trustworthy source.
Speaking of reputation, let's get into this IPO a little deeper. We talked about that huge amount of capital they're trying to raise, but what are the actual specifics of the offering?
So it's structured as a mix of a fresh issue and then an offer for sale by the current promoter, Blackstone.
Okay.
The fresh issue is expected to raise around 25 billion rupees, which will be used for acquisitions, tech upgrades, expansion.
So part of the IPO is going towards growing the business, which, you'd expect.
Yeah.
What about that offer for sale by Blackstone, though? What does that tell us?
Well, Blackstone, a private equity giant, they've been an investor in IGI for a while now.
Right.
And their decision to partially exit through this IPO, that could be seen as a signal that they're confident in the company's future prospects.
It's like saying we've helped this company grow and now we think it's ready for the public markets.
Right. That's a reasonable way to interpret it. But, investors should always do their own homework, their due diligence, not rely solely on what a private equity firm does.
Of course, of course. Now let's talk about the IPO pricing. How is that determined, and what should potential investors be thinking about?
It's going to be determined through a book building process, which is basically a fancy way of saying it's a price discovery mechanism.
Can you break that down a little bit? What does that book building process actually entail?
Sure. It involves getting bids from institutional investors at different price points. And based on the demand, the bids that come in, well, that's how they set the final IPO price.
So they're not just like picking a number out of thin air. It's a process.
Right.
It takes into account market demand and how much investors are actually willing to pay.
Exactly. And potential investors really need to look at things like IGI's financial performance, their growth prospects, the competitive landscape, overall market sentiment, all of that before they decide whether to invest and at what price.
It's almost like a high stakes auction, isn't it? You're trying to figure the real value of some rare gem.
That's a good analogy. Okay, shifting gears a bit. Let's talk about IGI's growth strategy. We know they're thinking acquisitions, expanding into new markets, but anything else about their strategy that really jumps out?
Well, from what I've seen, it looks like they're really emphasizing that shift towards becoming a more consumer-facing brand.
Yeah, they're definitely putting more effort into marketing, brand awareness, trying to make IGI a household name. Not just, among those in the industry, but among consumers in general.
Makes sense. If consumers start asking for IGI certification specifically, that's a powerful advantage in the market. Jewelers will be more likely to use their services if that's what customers want.
Exactly. It's about building brand recognition and trust at that consumer level.
Now, we can't talk growth without talking about the potential risks. We mentioned that cyclicality of the gem market, competition, but anything else investors should be aware of?
Well, one potential risk is that reliance on a few key markets, especially in Asia, any kind of economic downturn, political instability in those areas, that could have a big impact on revenue.
So diversification is key. They can't put all their eggs in one basket, so to speak.
So another risk is regulatory changes. The gem industry is, it's subject to all sorts of regulations, things about ethical sourcing, import, export restrictions.
Right.
And any shifts in those could really disrupt how they operate.
It's like they're constantly constantly having to adapt to this changing regulatory environment.
Yeah.
They got to stay flexible.
And then there's always that risk of reputational damage, like we
Yeah.
talked about before. Trust is everything in this industry.
Right.
Any any kind of scandal or controversy about their grading practices that could seriously hurt their image, erode that investor confidence.
It's a reminder that they've got to be, super careful, maintain those highest ethical standards, make sure those certifications are accurate.
Absolutely. Now, before we move on, I want to circle back to IGI's leadership team. You mentioned how important it is to assess their expertise, their experience. What have you found out about them?
From what I've gathered, it seems like a pretty solid team with a deep understanding of the industry. Tim Asp, Nariman Printer, the CEO, he's been with the company for quite a while, has a good track record.
That's good to hear. That kind of long-term leadership, that can be a real positive, especially in an industry where relationships and expertise are so, so valuable.
But it's not just about the CEO,
Right.
right? What about the board of directors, that overall governance structure?
Right. Good corporate governance is essential for any publicly listed company. It provides that framework for ethical behavior, transparency, accountability.
And from the information I've seen, it looks like IGI has a pretty diverse and experienced board,
Oh, okay.
a mix of industry experts and financial professionals.
That's encouraging. A diverse board can bring a wider range of perspectives, expertise, which can be really helpful in navigating those tricky situations.
Yeah, so it sounds like IGI has a solid leadership team, a good governance structure in place, and a pretty clear growth strategy. But of course, potential investors, they need to dig deeper, do
Right.
their own thorough analysis.
Absolutely. This deep dive is really just a starting point. It's so important to read that prospectus carefully, understand the risks, and decide if IGI really fits with your investment goals and your risk tolerance.
We've covered a lot of ground here, but there's still one more really interesting piece of IGI's story that we haven't gotten to yet. Their involvement in the lab-grown diamond world.
Right. That's a rapidly growing segment of the market, and IGI is really positioning themselves as a leader in certifying these ethically sourced and increasingly popular stones.
Welcome back to our deep dive into IGI. Before we took a break, we were talking about their growth strategy and how important technology is to everything they do. But let's shift gears a bit now and talk about something that's really shaking up the whole gemstone world. Lab-grown diamonds.
Yeah, lab-grown diamonds,
Re-
sometimes called synthetic diamonds. They're created in these controlled lab environments that mimic the conditions under which natural diamonds, form deep inside the earth.
So we're not talking about imitations here, right?
Nope.
Like cubic zirconia.
Right.
These are real diamonds just created in a different way.
Exactly. They have all the same physical and chemical properties as mined diamonds, even the optical ones. The only difference is how they're made. One takes millions of years naturally. The other is made in a lab in weeks.
That's pretty wild. To think we can actually create diamonds in a lab now that are essentially indistinguishable from those found naturally. I mean, that's got to have some pretty big implications for the whole industry.
Huge implications. Lab-grown diamonds are disrupting the traditional diamond market in a few ways. First of all, they're often more affordable than mined diamonds, which makes diamonds available to more people, more consumers.
So it's kind of democratizing diamonds.
Yeah.
Making them attainable to people who maybe couldn't afford a mined diamond.
Right, and that affordability is a big reason they're getting more popular, especially with younger generations, who are more budget conscious.
Aside from the cost, though, are there any other reasons why lab-grown diamonds are taking off like this?
The ethical side of things is a big draw too. Lab-grown diamonds are inherently conflict-free. They don't have those environmental and social concerns that you sometimes see with diamond mining.
That's a really good point. Consumers are way more aware now of where the things they buy come from, the ethical implications. They want to know that their purchases aren't contributing to environmental damage or human rights issues.
And lab-grown diamonds give them that. They're that sustainable, ethical option that aligns with how a lot of people think these days.
It's a fascinating shift in what consumers are looking for. So where does IGI fit into all of this?
IGI has been right at the forefront of this whole lab-grown diamond thing. They were one of the first gem certification labs to come up with specific grading standards and reports for these types of diamonds.
So they didn't shy away from this new technology. They embraced it. They saw it as an opportunity.
They did. They saw the potential of this emerging market and invested in the expertise and the technology to become leaders in lab-grown diamond certification.
Smart move. Puts them in a good spot as demand for these lab-grown diamonds keeps going up.
And being able to certify both lab-grown and natural diamonds, that gives them a real edge. They can work with both markets, offer a wider range of services.
It's like being bilingual, but in the gem world, you can speak the language of tradition and the language of innovation, and that just opens up more possibilities.
Exactly. That expertise in both areas, it means they can work with a broader range of clients, and capture a larger slice of that whole gem certification pie.
So as we start to wrap up our deep dive into IGI, what are some of the key takeaways here for our listeners?
I think the biggest one is that IGI is really at the forefront of innovation in this industry. They've built this strong reputation based on accuracy, consistency, and a commitment to using technology.
And they've shown that they get what's happening in the market. That early move into lab-grown diamond certification, that focus on becoming more consumer-facing.
Right. And this upcoming IPO, it gives investors a chance to be part of a company that's well positioned to take advantage of how the gemstone market is changing.
Of course, every investment has risks, and we've gone through those.
Wow.
Gem markets, ups and downs, competition, regulatory changes. Those are all things to think about.
Definitely. But IGI seems to have a strong base, good leadership team, solid governance structure, a clear strategy for growth, and they're in good shape financially with good revenue growth and profitability.
It's an interesting company with a really compelling story. Whether you're a seasoned investor or just fascinated by the world of gemstones, IGI is a company worth paying attention to.
And as with any investment, you got to do your research, really dig in, understand the risks, and decide if IGI aligns with what you're looking for, your goals and your risk tolerance.
Absolutely. We've given you the knowledge and insights from our deep dive. Now it's up to you to go out there, do your own research, and make an informed decision. But one thing's for sure, the world of gem certification is changing, and IGI is right there, right in the middle of it all.
It's an industry that's both ancient and modern, full of tradition, but also embracing the new. And IGI's journey, it reflects that. They're honoring the past, but they're also shaping the future of gemstones.
Well, we've reached the end of our deep dive,
Yeah.
but the exploration doesn't have to stop here. Keep seeking, keep learning, and keep shining bright.